Oslo. Actually, the first of its kind in Northern Europe, I'm told. So it should be about time, given that you, after all, are working with audio or aspiring to work with audio in the one creative industry that has outgrown both TV, film, and music combined by far, and we've only just seen the beginning of it. You're in forefront of new technology, and you are the ones that bring games alive. I think all of us here today can agree that the audio part, the role of audio in the production should never be underestimated. Because good audio work evokes and enhances emotions, and emotions, it's what gets people hooked. So, from the perfectly tuned little breath or squeak of floor plank to a full orchestral production, you make us happier, sadder, calmer, or just freaking scared as hell. So thanks for that, and thanks for being here today. Huge thanks also to the lovely people of Game Audio in Norway for making this conference happen. So a huge applause to Gain with the chair Theo Nogueira from Snowcastle.
1, 2, 3. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. When we started, first of all, welcome everybody to our first edition of GACO. We do intend to make this a yearly thing. We'll see how it goes. Since we started talking about making GAIN an official union a few years ago, we mentioned that one of our biggest goals was to make this happen, make an actual game audio conference happen in Oslo. And we were very surprised that it just happened a few months after we actually became official. Here we are. So I just will be very quick here. I just wanted to give thanks to all the people that have made this happen. First to our co-presenters, NFI, Viken Filmsenter, Kreativt, Europa, and Soundly. You've been a huge help. Also, thank you to Krillbite, Hypergames, Sony Music, D-Pad Studios, Snowcastle, and Knock Knock Audio for all the help and the support. Also, thank you to our speakers. They're here to make this happen. Without you, we would not have a conference. And to the whole team of GAIN, especially Uda for holding out with me with all my constant communication. But it seems to be working well. Also, thank you to all the volunteers and all of you that are here watching, or else we also wouldn't have a conference. Lastly, I wanted to thank you, Sarah, for being our conferencier and being also a big partner of GAIN in many different fronts. And for Sony Music, for letting her come here today and tomorrow instead of being in the office working. So we are very helpful for that. Thank you. And the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, I'm Sarah, and I've been given the honorable task of guiding you through these 2 days of inspiration, learning, and networking. We have 6 amazing speakers, 3 today and 3 tomorrow, and we also have a panel today and a panel tomorrow. We will be taken on a journey through different aspects and fields of audio, from live field recordings, via Foley, VR, to the ever-lurking question of AI. The conference is also streamed live, so to those of you joining us from home, a warm welcome to you too. Hope to see you here next time in person. Okay, so from the perspective of someone not working in games, I must say that standing here in front of an audience like you is not scary, because I do respect and fear your ears. I work with music every day at Sony, and I am an audio nerd myself since I was a little kid, experimenting with my dad's tape recorder and double cassette player and other stuff in his sound cave, which was literally a cave with mountain walls and stuff. So I guess we do have something in common. But I work closely with TV, film, and ads. And game audio, to me, seems like next level because it has the components of all the mentioned, but it also has its own. You work with universes that never sound or look the same. And this has kind of magical pull on me, maybe because I don't really understand it as well as the other ones, which we will also touch upon in the panel today. And yeah, for someone from the outside, it's truly impressive what you do. So what kind of skills do I imagine you must have to work with this? First of all, you need the technical skills, structure, communication skills, a huge amount of curiosity and creativity, and yeah, musical skills. Many of you compose yourself, play instruments, and a huge amount of emotional intelligence to be able to put yourself in the shoes of not only the player, but also the director and your colleagues from other departments. Yeah, patience and drive, because you do work a lot, I think. So yes, I do fear your ears. So I'll spend these 2 days trying to fine-tune the pitch and pace of my voice so that tomorrow at 5 I sound super pleasant. So input is highly appreciated. Also, I have another task for you. Because I do not know your inside industry jokes, please provide me with some good old game audio jokes along the way so I can create some awkward moments up here. Thanks. And now, if you should have to escape this place not using the regular stairs there, we have an emergency exit over there as well. For your bellies, we do have coffee and water over at the bar. Later on, there will be other refreshments as well, upstairs after 5. There will be a concert down here, so we're moving up after 5. The talks are quite long and breaks are quite short, but we do have a longer break as well, where you have food included. You can choose between vegan, vegetarian, or meat. So yeah, remember the game code of conduct, which is basically be nice to each other, respect each other, and if you do have any questions, find someone with a black sticker, or Theo, Uda, Martin, or some of our lovely volunteers. Okay, so let's do what we came here for. Let's take the first step into the world of game audio. Our first speaker had a digital piano at home only for practice. Then she discovered GarageBand through a student game project, and that's how it all began. Today, she's a game composer based in Poland. She's currently working for Atomic Wolf Studio and as a freelance composer for Timberborn, Scorched Lands, Glorious Companions, and Planar Conquest. She has also worked as a software developer, including time at Native Instruments synthesizers team, where she was an application developer for Massive X synthesizer. And in her talk today, she will discuss the benefits and challenges of live recordings of instruments and other organic sounds for the purpose of game music production. Let's give a very warm welcome to Sofia Domaracka.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to wait for the presentation to pop up. So welcome to my talk, which is called Enriching Music with Live Recordings. My name is Sofia Domaracka. Thank you, Sarah, for this introduction. So I can skip this slide. Shortly about the agenda. First, I'm going to give a short intro, why I'm giving this talk at all. Then we're going to discuss why should we, what are the benefits of recording live things and instruments. And then I'm going to walk you through the timber-borne music production process. And then we'll also discuss some challenges and decision-making regarding putting live instruments and live recordings into our music production process. And then we're going to discuss some ideas. What can we do if we don't have the budget to do the whole recording sessions? So why this talk? I think that accessibility of music production these days and also the skill set that is needed for game music production, which is also not only composing, but music production, implementation, ability to produce adaptive music, it kind of redefined composers' background, and I think there are more and more people who, like myself, didn't go through this formal education process. I graduated from secondary music school, but I never went to music university. So I think there are a lot of people like me who didn't have this opportunity to get experience with writing music for live instruments and being performed. And this is because we mostly base a lot on samples and on mock-ups. And when you start out, you probably are going to start out with smaller projects where you where these projects maybe don't need or think they don't need live recordings or simply they don't have the budget. But then comes a moment when opportunity arises, and I think it's good to know what the process is and maybe to think what are the benefits. So I thought giving a talk that would be useful for myself before I went through that process with Timberborn and some smaller recordings that I made at home. I thought this kind of talk would have been useful for myself some time ago. So I thought maybe it will be useful for some of you as well. So first, what do I mean by live recordings? So live ensembles, soloists, maybe orchestra, customized samples, or basically anything you feel like. So all the objects that you can record and make fun stuff with it. So why would we record anything live if these days we have new and new sample libraries that basically are getting better and better algorithms, more and more articulations, you know, like they sound more and more real. So I think samples are still always limited, and if we write a mock-up and we don't know if we're going to record something live or we know we won't, we write for samples, and specifically for the libraries that we own and know how to use. And they're just, even though they're getting better and better, there are just certain things that might be hard to reproduce. If you want some nuanced dynamic changes, or some articulations that we want something to play marcato, but like a little bit shorter, a little bit more aggressive, maybe a little bit different than what this library offers, you can layer different sounds, different libraries, but it's always a little bit limited. And then libraries always have limited number of articulations, velocities, round robins. They're perfectly produced, so they don't have these small like quirks and things that a live instrument produces. Then players' artistry. So a musician is a person, professional musician is someone who has spent like probably their whole life learning the instrument. So if they're giving a performance, it's a real performance where they put a soul into it. And I think it's hard, depending on the kind of music you write, but I think it's often hard to just fake it. And they will also know better than you what articulations and techniques will sound better in this particular music, or they can suggest maybe different type of instrument that might enhance your music. Then also, there are types of music when I guess it's even more important. For example, stylized music like folk music, where the knowledge of the style and experience with the style and this like energy and soul of the whole performance is the gist of the music. So I think this is this might be really hard to just to fake or to replicate. And last point, which is obviously not the most important one, but if you want to pitch to your client the idea that, hey, maybe we record this live with an ensemble or whatever, I think it's also a good material for the game, because collaboration between different artists, documenting the process, I think it's also something that is good for the game if you can talk about it somewhere. Okay, so let's talk about the process. I'm going to talk about Timberborn. Disclaimer, I'm going to talk about what I learned in this process. It doesn't have to be true for all projects. AAA games, for sure, will have different workflows, but for sure there are some common things, so I hope that will be useful. Timberborn is a city builder game, basically about colony of beavers. You're building a city and like the whole colonies, and it's divided into wet season and dry season. In dry season is like a challenge to the player because you have to basically live off what you produce during the wet season. And that's the moment where your colony might die out. And the emotions we wanted to convey was hardship, workers, also everyday life. So I decided for that project to use string quartet, which I thought, since these are very versatile instruments, they would enable me convey these emotions and add a little bit of sound of roughness we needed. So basically what was done in this soundtrack was recording string quartet and overlays for like more than 10 pieces of music. Some pieces have the full quartet, some had some solos. And this was the background music for gameplay, so we were avoiding any grandeur. But for the menu theme, which could stand out a little bit more, we decided also to record more. We recorded the music also with orchestra in Budapest. We had a short session with Budapest Scoring, and we recorded string quartet that overlaid on the string section, and also a guitar solo. So after, of course, there's researching, studio, musicians, engineer, and planning and aligning in everything, which was whole organizational work. First, since I didn't have a lot of time, I made, this is like an excerpt of my document that I made to go through the process in an organized way. So just showing to you that it might be useful naming all the files with numbers, not with final names like we are Timberborn, but just gameplay 1, 2, 3, because I thought it's better for the players, just they see the numbers, they know which track that is, and also you know that maybe you're missing number 5, so it's I think easier to navigate like that. Then session sent to the engineer. For the string quartet recordings, we were mixing and recording the string quartet in the same studio with the same engineer. I didn't have a lot of time, so I was creating the sessions for him and just like sending them right away. So that's the status of this. Some comments, if I was requested to send, for example, some stems without effects, I would document it here that we have some additional files. Then what will we record? So is it going to be the full quartet or just solo violin, so that I can align the session accordingly? Are we recording an overlay to this piece, yes or not? Is score and parts ready? Because again, I was sending the bulks to the players as I was going, so that they would have time to look at the music before they come to the session. And then any corrections, if I needed to send an updated project, so that to make sure this is a new version, during mix session we can just look it up, that we're sure we're not missing a version or anything like this. Okay, so then a very tedious process of creating music sheet and basically the score and the parts for the musicians. So this is a tedious process where you basically have to make this out of this. So making from a mock-up in a DAW, make a playable music sheet. And as you know, if you work with mock-ups, you're not quantizing everything to the grid, because then it would sound robotic and it would just not sound organic. So you have to organize it a little bit, because apart from that, you have also libraries that have latency, so everything might be moved a little bit. You can use track delays, for that, but it doesn't, always maybe work perfectly. So you have to clean that up. Sometimes you have different libraries that are layering one section because it just sounded better with a mockup. Maybe you use key switches, but maybe you use different tracks for different articulations. Maybe you're just playing rubato in some moments, and then you have to transfer it somehow to the notes. And it's not gonna transfer well the rhythm and everything with just one click. One thing to say that I didn't mention, what I was recording was partly live and part of it was still samples. So we didn't have this freedom that the musicians would come in and just play as they feel like, but they had to play to the click because some of the parts were mock-ups and some of them, for example, Menu was recorded in 3 different studios in 3 different parts, so everything needs to be played to the click. Yeah, so let's go further along. So these are the things you might need before the session. So for the orchestra session, I was asked for a Pro Tools session. I don't own Pro Tools, so I sent stems. You might be asked for another session format. My engineer, same as me, we use Studio One. So I just sent him a Studio One session. What you might want to remember about is to leave the pre-count, which you just don't want to start recording from 0. So maybe leave 2 bars empty in the session or with the stems, and then make sure it aligns well with the bar numbers are the same in the score in the music sheet. If you send stems, you probably will need also tempo map, which is the mid file, and maybe a click track so that you're sure it's as intended. And then last thing, it's pretty obvious, but maybe worth mentioning, since we use the same session for mixing and recording for the string quartet, naming and grouping and coloring all the sections of the instruments was really useful because sometimes we wanted, for example, to mute some tracks or to check something within the mockup, and then the faster you can navigate, it saves time, and then you can just record more music or do more passes or whatever you like. Yeah, and another thing that is also maybe obvious, but I still think worth mentioning, is that I think if you work with your music for months and your mockup, you get used to certain things. So you get used to your mix, you get used to your music, but then if you record live, maybe it will be mixed by someone else. It will sound differently, and so I learned that I have to really be sure to check all the stems once again and again, because then if you mute some tracks and then the musicians record to what's left, and then you have like a small quirk in the rhythm, it might throw them off, so just make sure everything is correct and you don't miss anything. Okay, the recording session. Things to remember when planning, what I found that could be useful just to think about before. So maybe not all musicians are needed for all music. So maybe you can discuss with the musicians how they want to align the session, because you don't want one person to be sitting for 4 hours and waiting. So just that way you can make everyone happy, maybe. Then if the session takes a few hours, people will get tired, obviously. Imagine playing an instrument for 8 hours straight. So if you have more demanding pieces, maybe better to put them first to be performed. If they need more focus, then maybe start with them. And then planning, I think, would be just a summary of different things like that, because also some parts may be more demanding than you think. So it would be good to have some time buffer. And if you don't, then align it according to the importance, for example. What I was thinking about was that we had overlays which were optional, so I wanted to leave them till the end. And there were like certain pieces that were really important and I wanted to start with them. But then again, it's better for the musicians to play one piece, all parts, and they just, because they learn the music and they don't have to switch between and then go back to them. So I think all of these factors need to be taken into consideration. And then balance between recording the material and getting it perfect. I think it's easy to have that mock-up ingrained in your mind, and then when things are recorded live, they sound really differently. And maybe you want some corrections, but you don't have enough time. So for the orchestra session, for example, I had 2 pieces prepared, knowing for the half-an-hour shared session, knowing that probably I am not going to have time for the second one, but also that was a decision that I had to take during the session because I wanted more passes with the first more important piece of music, and I wanted to get it really how I wanted instead of getting 2 pieces recorded but maybe not satisfactory to me. One thing I guess worth considering, I got an advice before orchestra session, which I think was a good advice, to record sections separately. So we recorded woodwinds and string sections separately, and I think that was a good idea because we had a lot of flexibility during the mix, which otherwise would be a little bit limited. And the same for string quartet. This is, by the way, Auditus Quartet, who recorded for Timberborn soundtrack. A learning was that if you have certain melodies or voices that you know are important and that should stand out, make sure you know where they are, mark them, and so remember to request it from the players, or actually record them separately as well. Because later during the mixing session, maybe you want this voice to be more prominent. And if it's all recorded together, then volume up from instrument A then makes all the other instruments that were recorded with this mic louder as well. So that way you can maybe have more flexibility. Okay. So then the results. First of all, the realism, I think here, I wanted to play you the mock-up and then the live recorded version. The video is not synced, so it's just an illustration. And I think it shows nicely, since this is like a lively piece, it shows nice the energy and the realism that was brought to the piece by the live musicians. Of course, the live version is also mixed in a studio, but I hope you hear. Now we can listen to the live version. And then artistry. We are Timberborn, so that was the menu theme, where we also recorded the orchestra. We recorded a guitarist who was playing the main melody, sort of. And that was also interesting challenge here because we had string quartet session on Saturday, orchestra session on Monday, Then a little bit after that, the guitar was being recorded remotely in the guitarist studio. He recorded himself. And only after that we had our mixing session. So I was asked by the guitarist to maybe send the orchestra recordings, but we didn't have it ready yet, the mix or anything. So I had to create this like quick pre-mix so that he could play the guitar to the flutes that were playing along, because they would play a little bit differently with a rhythm or an expression than in the mocap, and he wanted to play along it, of course, and maybe tuning could have possibly been an issue. So that was actually recorded in 3 different passes in studios. So and I wanted to show you the mockup, how it was recorded with sampled guitar and sampled instruments, and then live with real guitar, which I think has a lot more expression and artistry in the performance, and also the woodwinds in these fragments are recorded live. Okay, and now the live version. I hope you heard that it sounds better. I think it sounds better and more expressive. And then another point I was talking about, and this is Krzysiek Włochowicz, the guitarist for this project. It is instrument knowledge. It was Krzysiek's idea to, at some point of the theme, to introduce a 12-string guitar, because it would sound nicer, and I really think it sounded way nicer. So this is a comparison again of the mocap and the result of also the instrument choice later. And the live. And violin is live here as well, so I hope it's heard. Yeah, and I think it's had a way nicer color of the sound and really enhanced this part of the music. Okay, this, if you're interested in the soundtrack, you can listen to it here to see all the results. So there are some challenges. things to consider before you decide to record your music live, I think, first of all, is to know that it's really a lot of work. So both time and money budget have to be considered. So especially if you're in a situation where the music production is still going on and you're still composing, but maybe there's a deadline from the game development perspective. This is all additional work besides composing. So very often you start with a mock-up and samples first, so the decision maybe hasn't been made at the beginning, whether we're going to record something live or not. Maybe the budget is not clear yet, so maybe you need to decide it like as you go. So the source material will be the mock-up that you will show to the client and that they will accept it or not. So the source material will not be the score, like the music sheet. So preparing it takes a lot of time. I didn't have to prepare anything for the guitar recording. This was a nice time saver. Some musicians might request it, some not. For that, I just send MIDI and the recordings, and the musician was able to play it from there. But for the orchestra and for string quartet, I had to prepare the score for all music. So if you're working on, I don't know, indie projects where you'll be responsible for all the process, you'll need to spend time researching musicians, booking them, booking the studio and the engineer, and aligning everything timely so that it all that you can make it in time. Writing out the score, which is really time-consuming. Maybe if you want to consult the score with the musicians or some externals, count that in. Then legal contracts, this might be handled by your client, but maybe by you. So if you have a ready template, that's great. But if you don't, you need to think about this as well, that you need to basically own the rights for these recordings. Taking the time for budgeting, so when you're choosing, researching musicians, it's not only are they recommended, good for the style, good for this music, but also do they fit the budget that we have. And then if you want some documentation, also photographer, camera person, so additional things like these. Okay. Then money budget, of course. Musician, studio, engineer, this all costs money and we need to have budget for that. But also there are some things you can outsource if you don't have time, like creating the score. Maybe someone can do it for you if you don't have time, but then you need some budget for that as well. Legal stuff, if you're in charge of it as well. And then last but not least, your time. Because all of that is the work that you do apart from composing. So this is the time you will not spend on working on other projects. And even if you get help and outsource some of these things, still it's your music, and you'll need to supervise it, you'll need to be at the recording session, mixing session, and all that kind of stuff. So for me, all that process was like 2 weeks of work, more or less. So that was 2 weeks, additional full 2 weeks that I spent on that project. Of course, for other like bigger, I don't know, maybe AAA games, probably the workflow is totally different, but that was my case. So I already spoke about some challenges with live recordings. A few more things to mention. Planning ahead whether there will be live recordings or not. As I said, this might not be clear from the beginning of the projects. Projects evolve, budgets change. So you might want to write differently, and you might need to finish composing by particular date if you want to do the live recordings. So this is all like a bit organic. Then researching musicians for particular music, and hopefully maybe they're recommended so that they can just come into the session and play, and so that you maybe don't have to repeat too many times, and you can save time. My learning was that summer period is tricky because, yeah, everyone goes for vacation. So my planning was, musician would say, okay, I can record, but till this Sunday because then I leave. And then the engineer was going to vacation, and then we had a deadline. So yeah, take that into consideration that aligning all of this might be sometimes tricky in some periods of time. Location as well, if you record locally, great, but if you have to travel, then you have to count that into time and budgets that people have to get to the location, and also maybe they need to sleep there, and all that stuff. And then getting used to samples. You listen to your music for a long time, which is recorded with samples, and yeah, after that you record it live and it suddenly gets a little bit different, of course. And yeah, it's good to know what actually you're aiming for during the session. So decision making, few kind of obvious questions like, do I have the budget and do I have the time? And I think a few factors count in to the decision, like also style of music. There are particular styles where it would be more necessary than in the others. And then you can, knowing your budget and time and what the needs of your music are, you can decide whether maybe you want to record a soloist, or maybe just overlays on the sections, maybe a band, an ensemble, maybe a full-blown orchestra. Maybe you have you get a shared session with an orchestra for like more important pieces. And what can we do if we do not have the budget? So I think we can still do quite a lot. So first of all, maybe you can hire a soloist and build a soundtrack upon it. So there are a lot of games that are high-budget, well-known games that don't hire a full orchestra. For example, The Witcher soundtrack was based upon this like folkish band. Journey was based upon like build around solo cello, and these kinds of decisions can be because of budget, or maybe they're just like artistic decisions. But these are great soundtracks; people love them. They didn't need like the full live orchestra, and they still sounded great. So there are a lot of ideas what can be done. So for example, you can hire soloists and record them at home on your home studio, or have a remote session at their studio. A lot of composers also are instrumentalists or vocalists, so you can record yourself if that's possible. Or you can, if you have a lot of string sections, maybe you can have a soloist record overlays on that music from different mic positions. For Timberbone, we were also recording overlays, and my engineer's setup was to actually have mics at different positions, so we had like few positions, but you can also ask the player to move the chair around if they're recording themselves. Then, for example, what I did in some projects, I used to play piano. I learned guitar years ago a little bit, but I really cannot play guitar or cannot play ukulele, but I own these instruments. And I wouldn't be able to play like the full piece and make it sound good, but what I would do sometimes is just like record some small phrases or legatos or stuff like this, which I think can add also some liveness that would be maybe a bit harder to achieve just with samples. And this is one example. This is Glorious Companions, which had like graphical overhaul, and the vibe was supposed to be a little bit dark. So what I did, I recorded at home like very super simple legatos and detunes with ukulele, and I thought that combining that with sampled guitar would maybe give that vibe that would work for the piece. So this is this like super simple ukulele soloed out track. Yeah, this is like super simple thing, and then I combined it with the rest of the music. yeah, I thought it was it sounded a bit dark, and that brought some organicness to the to the music. Then this is short example of an overlay. This didn't go to any game project, but I did it for some kind of demo or reel, and I needed to make it sound better for like overnight. There's like a very simple phrase or like ostinato in string section, which is very easy. So I just went to the internet in the evening and asked some violin player to record the overlay. So I had it like 7 tracks from different positions, and this is so that maybe it could help sound the section a bit more realistic. And this is comparison. This is without overlay. And this is with overlay. Okay. Then I think the musical sounds are not the only sounds we can record and bring some interesting sonic characteristic to our music. So things we can do at home is use the instruments in a creative or maybe unusual way. Getting inspired from your environment or nature, and sometimes happy accidents happen that you discover some sounds that you would normally try out, but they sound cool and you can use them. This is one example. It's also a city builder game named Scorchlands, and it's about bird folk. So one of the tracks was an ambient, so it was supposed to be very background, chill-out music. So since it's about bird folk, I went with my field recorder and recorded birds, surprisingly. And it's not very heavily processed. I just loaded into a synthesizer, surprise, surprise, Massive X. And I did just some slight modulations on pitch with LFO and put up some effects. And I think it gave some interesting sound bed that was organic and mine into this piece. So I just play it. And the low sounds are also, I recorded legato guitar myself. Then for Timberborn, apart from the musical instruments, I recorded homemade percussion with IKEA knives. And just to have some control over the percussive sounds, since the game is about beavers, metal and wood sounds seemed appropriate. So I just was like doing some percussion stuff that I think it was just like easier play it as I wanted and like have a lot more control than if I had samples. Do I still have 3 minutes? 2 minutes, okay. So this is, I'm hitting the glass, it's like stuff like this. And also wood sounds like scratching the strings of a guitar, or like doing some hitting of the woods, which I thought would be interesting for the game. I'm not going to show this example because we don't have time. Last example, which was a happy accident example. This is the tenants. It's like a Sims game. You're a landlord and you basically have to deal with your tenants. And it recently got an update with new tenant type, which is a musician. So I had to create some small fragments of music for different type of musicians, and one of them was DJ. It's not supposed to be very serious or anything, but I was recording some vocals to that piece of music. And then I left my monitoring on with the effects, and I was cleaning up my recordings, and I heard the mouse wheel sounds pretty cool with the effects. So I actually used it for like this rhythm bed for this club sounding music. So this is how it sounds. Yeah, so that's an example of an unexpected inspiration that can come from literally anywhere. And last but not least, making sound with your mouth is easier than programming a synth. So especially if you're not fluent with synthesizers and you want to create like a particular sound, percussive sound or pad or something like that, and you want to have control over it, this is a very powerful tool. So if you have a chance to go to a beatbox workshop or learn vocal effects, I think this is a great idea to come up with many interesting sounds and enrich your music with some sounds that maybe you wouldn't be able to produce fast from a synth, because this is just basically super fast. You can just like do the sounds like this. I didn't prepare any examples because I knew I will not have time to show them. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want to check out my social media, it's here. I don't know if you have time for questions. No? Yes? If there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophia, for this super inspiring glimpse into the world of live recordings and a lot of good tips and advice along the way, the whole process. If you have any questions to Sophia, you can contact her in social media or grab a hold of her today. We have a 5-minute break now. So yeah, let's take a break and be back here at 2.
footstep.
Recording in progress.
Okay, are you ready for the next speaker? If you ever meet our next speaker and she asks you about your shoe size, it's probably because she actually wants your old shoes. She has got suitcases full of old, worn, and torn shoes, and she loves them dearly. uh, yeah, and as a Foley artist, she walks the streets with open eyes, and she stops at each junk pile to see if there's something she could use. She's been dragging home old, rusty, foldable wheelchairs, and sometimes she stops in the streets and keeps walking in place to see if it matches the natural walking sound. So I don't know what her kids think about the regular Sunday stroll with the family, but I'd certainly like to join. So with us today, we have Almut Schwacke from Berlin. She's a Foley artist, sound designer, and composer, highly qualified and trained tone meister. And her past work includes a wide array of game and movies. And she's currently working on Beholder 3, You Suck at Parking, and the hilarious VR game Tentacular. Today, she'll let us into the world of Foley, so please welcome Almut Schwacke.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction, Sarah. I'm actually a bit sad that I can't be there with you today in Oslo, mingling with all you lovely audio peeps. But with the current state of COVID in Germany, I just didn't feel comfortable traveling internationally, so here we are. I hope you all stay safe and have a great time wherever you are. I was afraid of streaming 2 cameras and 2 mics at the same time live, so I'm going to do the first part of my talk live, and then we'll watch a video where I show stuff that I pre-recorded 2 days ago. I'm currently sitting in my Foley room at home, surrounded by a fraction of the stuff that I own. I hope you can enjoy a bit of visual chaos. And yeah, I'm really happy to talk about what I find the most playful and fun occupation in audio, Foley. I don't know how many of you really know what Foley is exactly, so I'm going to tell you a bit about the history of it and how I fell in love with it. Foley really has its roots in the movie business. The profession is named after Jack Foley, who is accredited with being the first one to perform footsteps and other sound effects in sync to picture in the era when silent movies developed into movies with sound. And this job still exists today, since when a movie is being shot on set, the main thing to capture on set is the voice of the actors, the dialogue. So they use directional microphones, and as probably all of you know, those directional microphones pick up sound from a specific direction very well, but everything else from other directions is much more quiet. So in the finished movie, a lot of the noises that you want to hear are actually missing, or way too quiet, or they just don't sound good. And all of these noises are then later recreated by a Foley artist in a studio environment. We cover pretty much everything that was generated by living creatures, except voices. So that would be clothes rustling, human and animal footsteps, and pretty much everything that was handled or touched by those creatures. So that's the whole wide range of coffee cup, a chair, putting your hands on the table, a steering wheel, door handles, everything. So at this point, a lot of people ask, can't you just put all of those sounds out of a sound library? And in some cases you can, but in reality it's in most cases much quicker and better to do it with a human being to the picture. And the reason for that is that so many little things make a difference in what sound you want to hear. If you take footsteps, for example, you have the surface. That could be anything from grass or sand or gravel to a stone floor. The floor could be wet or dirty, and that all makes a huge difference. It could be indoor or outdoors. Then you have the shoe of the character that determines the sound. Is it a boot? Is it a high heel? Is it a sneaker? Maybe the character is barefooted. It all sounds completely different. You also have the acting part of it, like what mood is the character in? Are they nervous or happy or tired? That all impacts the way they walk and thus the way it sounds. Also, for example, children have a super different way of walking to grown-ups or even very old people. And also stuff like walking up and down the stairs sounds different than just normal walking on the sidewalk. So all of these things make a difference, and finding all of these right sounds in a sound library is pretty tedious itself. And then in a movie you would have to apply these sounds to every time that the foot of the actor meets the ground. So it just takes a huge amount of time, and just quicker and better if someone trained just does it. So I got my first glimpse into this world about, I think, 14 years ago, when a colleague asked me, do you want to do a Foley edit for me? And I said yes, without even knowing what that was and what I was supposed to do. So a Foley edit is when someone, after the recordings with the Foley artist, then edits these recordings to be in perfect sync with the picture, because naturally everything we do is a tiny bit late because we react to what we see on screen. So for that first Foley edit job, I went to a Foley stage to sit in with the recordings, and it was my first time visiting a Foley stage. A Foley stage is a studio that's built specifically for recording Foley there, so it's usually a very quiet place, because a lot of these noises that we make are pretty quiet, like the cloth rustling and stuff like that, so you can't have any outside noise pouring into your recording. And a Foley stage should also have a good solid floor without any resonances, so you don't hear that you're in a room when you're actually recording footsteps for outside. So yeah, I went there, and at that time I had no idea how little is actually left in a finished movie edit from the production sound. Like when they started playing that movie back, I was like, wow, this thing is pretty dead except for the voices of the actors. And then this Foley artist started doing his thing, and they started recording and layering all these tiny noises, like the clothes rustling, the footsteps, a plastic bag that was flapping through the picture in the background, the straps on the hiking backpack of the actor when he moved around. and it brought everything to life. It really was a huge revelation for me. It was like going from 2D to 3D with sound. And then I took a peek into the room where the Foley artist was working. Like usually you have two rooms, one where the Foley artist is working and another room where the recording person is listening to everything from the perspective of the microphone. So I took a peek into the room of the Foley artist, and it looked like a messy garage full of stuff, kind of like here, but bigger. And he kept rummaging around in his things like, oh, I know what I need. And then he just, it was like magic to me. So yeah, I was wildly in love and ventured into this direction myself over the coming years. So as I said, the origins of Foley are in the movie world. And for a long time, I was irritated by the way that games people use the term. Because one key element of Foley in games is missing most of the time for me, and that's the performing in sync to picture. Because you only have that in games when you're recording Foley for a cutscene. Pretty much everything else is always snipped up into single events, so it's not this reenacting a linear scene, which is a good part of the Foley work for movies. So the distinction between sound designer and Foley artist is just not as clear in the games world as it is in the movie world. Like a lot of sound designers record sounds themselves. So yeah, but I've grown accustomed to it. And it's definitely a huge help when sound designing to have a lot of things around that you can make noises with and know how to manipulate things into making specific sounds. But I also find that training to follow the action on screen and mimicking it gives you a tremendous training for your ears and your brain. Like you should definitely try it if you have some time. Maybe when you watch a movie the next time, put on a pair of shoes and walk with one character on screen. I mean, you can sit on your couch and just walk sitting. Yeah. So Foley in games. What can we do with Foley in games? Like one crucial thing in game audio is variations. And Foley is an excellent tool for that. You can record 20 or 30 variations of one sound, and you can determine how much variation you need. Like sometimes you have sounds that should be varied, but not too much. Footsteps are a great example for that most of the time, because if you have a pool of 20 footsteps, you want some variation in there, but you don't want two footsteps to have this specific creak in there that everyone will notice when they get randomized and played all over again. Like our brains are super great at recognizing patterns. So if you have these distinct things in a pool of sounds that should not be too varied from each other, people are going to notice and they're going to hate those two footsteps. On the other hand, sometimes there are sound effects where you want a lot of variation. And yeah, if you're recording yourself, you can just determine how much variation you need. And you can also vary a sound effect from a sound library. Maybe you have only 3 variations of that nice sound that you want to use in your library, but you need 10. And if you then can add a layer to that sound and then just make 10 variations of that layer, then you can make 10 nice variations of that sound pretty easily. Foley is also a really great tool for defining your game world. Foley is so much about materials. Like you can tell your audience what material a specific thing is made of without the graphics giving it away. Or you can tell your audience that there's carpet on the floor or that the floor is gritty, even if you don't see it in the picture. So for me, Foley often feels like a texturing tool in the audio department. it's also a really great tool to shift your audience's attention, because when we record Foley for a scene, unless it's for a TV movie where everything needs to be like done super quick, we try to split everything up in tons of layers. So if you, for example, have a scene where you have a character packing up their things to leave their apartment, maybe in the beginning you hear everything, like the clothes, the footsteps, the coffee cup, the chair, whatever. And maybe in the end, this person is picking up the goodbye letter that they just wrote from the table to read it one last time. And in that moment, maybe you want to have everything else go quiet and just focus on that paper. And you can also tell your audience about the tenderness with which your character might be picking up the paper just by the sound of it, and just by varying your own way of handling it when you record it. So yeah, it's a very great way to focus and also to create intimacy. It's like a looking glass or a magnifying glass in the audio world to me. I hope I didn't rush through that stuff too much. I had to a bit because my video has a fixed length and it needs to be played until the end. And that's where we arrive now. So if someone could start my show and tell video, that would be awesome. So a good chunk of the everyday work life of a standard Foley artist are footsteps. So that's what I'm starting with today. I once met a sound designer who said, "Ugh, footsteps, I hate them." I was like, how? Like, for me, the beauty of Foley lies in the detail. And footsteps are such a great tool to provide details about your character. Just a quick word about my setup today here. I've set up two cameras, the one I'm talking into and one for here. For the footsteps, you should see it here somewhere in the finished video. So you can see what I'm doing with my feet as well. I also had to take my laptop into this room with me, which is obviously not ideal. You will hear the fans, but we'll have to live with that. On the floor, I have this portable stone that I built at some point, mainly for use on stage when I'm doing Foley for radio plays. And that's lying on the floor of my apartment, which is also not ideal because you will probably hear some resonances of the apartment floor below, which is not great when you want to do footsteps for outside. So in that case, you would have to find a better floor. All right. The way Foley artists work differs between countries. Like, a lot of colleagues work standing and some sit down like I'm at the moment. Obviously, when you're doing something on stage, sitting down is the way to go, because then you can arrange all your stuff around you so you have it on hand when you need it. And it's also not as straining in general physically when you're sitting down. Like I said, a good chunk of the work is doing footsteps. If you're working on a movie, for example, at least 30, if not 40% of the time, you're doing footsteps. Excuse me. And if you spend like a whole day standing on your feet, that's exhausting. So sitting down can be the nicer option. It also has the advantage that you can walk several people at the same time, which can happen on stage, but also when you're working on a TV movie, there always time is super short to do everything, and for certain things like people in the background that you don't need to pan around separately, we sometimes just walk several people at one time, and that's you can do that very well when you're sitting down. It would be like that. But standing also has its advantages. When I'm in the studio working on a movie, I do prefer standing because it just keeps me more up on my toes. quicker in the brain, which is always a good thing, obviously. And also I find it a bit easier to mimic the natural behavior or the natural sound of footsteps. It's a different thing walking down the street or walking in one place in front of a microphone. You have to train that to get the right sound. When you're doing Foley in general, a good part of that is knowing what the sound should sound like. And that might sound easy, but it's not. It's like drawing a bicycle. Sometimes you're like, yes, of course I know how it sounds like. But then when you need to make it, you're like, but how exactly? Like, you know that walking up the stairs sounds considerably different to someone just walking down the street. But would you know how to do it? You would have to probably listen to it first, how it sounds, and then try to mimic that behavior in the studio. So yeah, listening is a big thing. Let me show you how to walk some stairs. You would just... It's just the scuff with the front part of your feet. Another thing about footsteps is shoes. I own so many shoes, and I love them all very dearly. But not because they look great, but because they all sound different. Like this pair of shoes that I have on my feet right now, I just picked them up on the street in Berlin a couple of days ago. Berlin is a very handy city for Foley artists because it's so dirty and chaotic and people just drop the stuff they don't want anymore on the sidewalk. And yeah, I will be picking up your stuff on the sidewalk. Of course, I will sanitize everything. And in foreign shoes, I always wear socks, obviously. Maybe you already heard it. There's this, what's the word? Reißverschluss? You know what I mean. This thing here that keeps on clinking when I walk with it. And if that's annoying, which it probably will be when you're recording footsteps, you can just put your socks over it and it's gone. Another great tip, if you want to get into doing footsteps and being quick with it, is not having these tied shoelaces on your shoes, but instead take them out and put some elastic band in there so you can just swap your shoes really quickly. And that's what I'm going to do right now. Swap my shoes quickly so I can show you a bit of the beauty of different shoes. Like obviously high heels sound different to sneakers. So much for changing quickly. But if you take sneakers, like these are both sneakers and they both sound really different. Let me show you. Oops. And the other one, for comparison, this is one of my favorite shoes. I love the sound. It's such a great shoe. It has this super soft sole, so it doesn't have as much attack as other shoes. It's wonderful. In general, most shoes I come across do have a too hard sole. Like you don't want too much attack in your footsteps. And if you have a good recording engineer in the studio with you, they might fiddle around with transient designers to get rid of the attack, but it's also great to just have the right sound in your shoe when you need it. So yeah, start going through your shoes at home. Another thing is surfaces. Like I said before, there are so many surfaces to walk on. Like this would be a stone surface. And what I often see when people start getting into Foley is they build themselves these portable pits that they then fill with gravel or sand or whatever. And I almost never find these convincing. Often they're too lightweight and small. Like this is just really a stage thing that I have on my floor here. In the studio, I would just rant all day because it's super small. You can't be like very versatile on it and just move around on it without thinking about hitting it on the side or falling off of it. So space is a good thing to have. And with these portable Foley pits, I often hear the resonance of the frame. And as I said, it can be okay to hear this resonance. In some cases, you can filter it out in some cases, but it's just better to have it without it. So you don't need to spend time afterwards on getting rid of stuff you don't want in the sound. So what I prefer to do instead of having pits is having different surfaces in a pillowcase or something similar. So you can just put it on the floor, preferably a floor bigger than this thing, and fold it open, and there you have your surface to work on. And there are so many options. You can have like sand in there or dirt or a mix of everything, a bit of, this is some kind of bast stuff for a bit of foliage crunch. If you need lots of foliage, you can just grab the good old tape. And then you have a lot of crunchy leaves under your feet. If that's too crunchy, you can put something on top and have it a bit less, or you just use less of the tape. So it's just a tiny bit of foliage. For use on stage, some Foley artists have a similar thing, but sewed into a tiny sack. And a really great tip, if you just want a tiny bit of crunch added to your sidewalk, stony footsteps, do not use sand. It will produce these super harsh clicks that can be really annoying. Just use some ground coffee. Sprinkle on the floor. Enjoy the smell. And then you have grit on your floor. Awesome. That is actually one of my favorite sounds in life. I enjoy it so much. Like gritty footsteps. I live for them. Yeah, that's my, those are my main tips on doing footsteps. If you want to get into doing footsteps yourself, I would advise you to listen and practice. And I regularly do this. When I'm walking on the street, I listen to my footsteps while I walk. And then at some point I stop walking and at the same time keep walking in the same spot. Like I walk in place. And I try to really keep the sound the same. And that's a super great exercise that you could do. Just walk around and then stop walking and walk in place and try to keep the sound that you had when you were walking around. Another thing that I find super helpful, fascinating and satisfying when doing Foley is resonances. Like you can alter a sound from something into something different by using a second thing with a specific resonant body that you attach to it. For example, take this nice big, I think you call it screw clamp or something like that, that my partner got me on the flea market a few weeks back. It looks great, but it sounds like this on its own, so not much. But if you attach it for example to this chair, nice, right? But there are so many things you can use as resonating bodies. Cardboard boxes, also nice. I hope you hear the nice belly that this cardboard box is giving this thing. Let's hope nothing falls down. Maybe a small wooden box is the way to go. But always a great thing to give resonance is one of my favorite materials, metal. And this happens to be one of my favorite props of all times. I love the sound this thing makes. If you use that as a resonant body, you instantly have a metal quality to the creak. So yeah, start playing around with combining things together. This also works for stuff like cranks. This is the crank. Is it a crank? Whatever. It's nice on its own, but it's different with something else attached. Much bigger instantly. Suitcases are an excellent resonance source. This suitcase is so big and amazing. I actually used this for the footsteps in the caravan in the game Nuts. Awesome game about observing squirrels. You should buy it if you haven't already. And yeah, the footsteps in the caravan is me walking around on this thing. I can't show you right now because I don't have the space here right now. But I love resonances. You can also do it the other way around, not attach something resonant to something else, but just work on this resonant thing. For example, with these wheels. Wheels are also an interesting thing in Foley, because if you want to do the rolling sound of something that rolls continuously, then you need to have something that can go in a circle. Because if you have a skateboard, for example, and you do like and you have to stitch it up in post to get a continuous sound. But if you have something that rolls in every direction, you can just go in a circle in front of your mic. And you need to be careful, maybe you hear it. There are certain parts that sound a little bit different. So when I go at the same speed, you hear it at the same, yeah, it kind of loops. The different sound loops. So you need to be aware of that if you do something like that. Apart from the human characters in your movie or game that may need footsteps, there are also sometimes animals that walk around. The most obnoxious example of Foley for animals is coconuts for horse hooves. You can totally use them. There are different sizes. They all sound a little different. You can put something in there to make them sound a little different. I have a pair somewhere with a bit of clay-like stuff in them. Works? Okay. You can also, for horse hooves, use these plungers. Please buy them new. And I also own a pair of actual horse hooves that I decided not to show today because I don't want to disturb anyone. Yeah, and what you will use in the end actually depends on, obviously, your picture, like what sound you need. Is it comical? Is it realistic? But also the surface you're walking on or working on. I will show you these examples I showed you on the stone with a different surface, and you will see, or rather hear, that it makes a difference. Oops. The plungers, I didn't like them too much on stone, but on this thing, I think they're super fine. In fact, you can also do, give me a minute, horse hooves without any props, just on your legs with your cupped hands. So many options. If you do footsteps for other animals, it's always a good idea to have leather gloves on hand, because human skin on surfaces has a very specific sound that we often detect as being a human hand, while this extra layer gets rid of that. So depending on what you're looking for, this would be a creature without any claws. You can use those gloves. On dirt, it could be a small hooved animal. If you have something with claws, where is it? You can attach paper clips to a glove. I couldn't find the second one, so. And if you're on stage, for example, or just need a very quick dog on a hard surface, you can use a pearl necklace and just tap it with your fingers in your hand. So a few last tips for what you can do when you want to start doing stuff like this yourself. You can build your own creaking device. This is a wooden frame with a hole in it, and this is a part of a broomstick. For this you can use a strap or a rope or whatever, and this screw here is actually putting tension on the strap, so the broomstick really rubs against the wooden frame. So when you then turn it, it's actually that stiff that I can't move it by hand, or not easily. It creaks. Again, better with a resonant body attached. that would be a wooden creaking device. And you can also make metal things creak more by making them rust. There's this great sentence from Jonas Turner, great sound designer. I don't know if you're watching, Jonas, but if you do, I love you. You're a great person and I love your work. Awesome. He once said, "The rustier, the crustier." And it's just an awesome sentence. It makes so much sense. Clean metal almost never really creaks. But if you make it rust, then it's nice. And you can do that by putting metal things in vinegar overnight, and then you have a crusty device. I want to wrap this whole thing up with my own personal love ode to Foley, in the hopes that some of you also discover your love for it. I love Foley for its variety, for its physicality. I'm not only sitting in front of a computer all day, I also get to do stuff with my hands, to carry stuff, to get sweaty and dirty and manipulate things. It often feels to me like I'm playing hundreds of instruments, kind of, because to do that job well, you need to know all the props you're using, because you need to know how the things react and how you can make them react differently if you want to. It's a very tactile job. I love that. But what I also really, really, really love is all those thousands of things I own have their own little story attached to them. Like friends started giving me stuff they don't need anymore, or where they're like, "Look, this makes a nice sound." My family collects stuff from the streets for me. I find stuff on the streets. I go through stuff from friends that they want to throw away and stuff like that. And whenever I'm using these things in my job, I remember those situations. I think of the people who gave those things to me, and I feel so much love. And I'm very sure that this is what makes me better at my job, not in some esoteric way, but just because I love what I'm doing. And I want to show you some of those memories. This, for example, is a bathing toy my kids used to use when they were smaller. This is a thing I stole at a construction site on my way home from a job. This was given to me by a friend, actually. This lovely thing I found during a vacation in Norway. Favorite country still. This is from my partner's grandma. When she died, we needed to empty the house, and this nice creaky thing for cutting, I don't know, onions or so, is from her. And this I got on a trip to my brother's. I just love this. I love collecting memories, and I love making sound with all these memories. Thank you.
Almut, please give a warm applause. This is just super fun and super interesting, and it's so impressive how you can actually sit down and make it sound like true natural footsteps. That's art in itself. We do have time for a Q&A, so if any of you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll get the mic. No? Then I'll just have one question. Do you have a lot of storage space? Because
Not enough. Yeah, I mean, I have stuff all over my flat in different, I don't know the word. But I also have a basement full with stuff. I keep dreaming of my own Foley stage, but it's impossible to find a nice big space in the city that one can pay without working 22 hours a day. So I have to make do with my flat, but it's okay. Sometimes I come across a bathtub on the sidewalk and I'm like, and then my family's like, nope, nope, you don't need that. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much again. It's really inspires to open our ears and eyes. So yeah, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay. I was actually also reminded of a music video from a Norwegian electronic duo named Lemaitre. They're not Sony, by the way, but the music video is called Fiction. It's about a Foley artist. It's super fun. Check it out. Yeah. And now there's a longer break. There will be, yeah, the meals are already there, so you can choose over there. We have about 30 minutes to let everything sink in, both inspiration and food. So, yeah, let's be back here at 3:15. Thanks. Hello. Okay. I hope your stomachs are full and that you're happy and ready for the last part of the conference. We will be having our third and last speaker for the day and also a panel. But first, I have a message from Olmut. If you have any questions for her regarding Foley, please write to her on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is her name. So, yeah, you can find her there, and she'll be happy to answer your questions. When continuing in the spirit of live recordings, I do have a fun fact about our next speaker for the day. She was once recording for a vomiting scene, recording her colleagues' fake vomiting. But then she got food poisoned, and she thought, aha, of course, I'll record myself vomiting for real. She did, and it ended up sounding so much better with the fake vomiting. So that's advice from her. Malin Arvidsson has been around so long that she has made sounds for a PlayStation 2 game. She's an experienced sound designer with over 20 years of experience working in audio for games. She started her career in 2000 when she was joining the pioneering game composer Richard Joseph at Audio Interactive. Then she started freelancing and has been working for companies like Sony, DICE, Codemasters, and Splash Damage. She spent 2 years working with VR games at PlaySnack and Ubisoft, and since a year back, she's been working at Massive Entertainment in Malmö, Sweden. Today, she will be talking about audio for VR and spatial 3D audio. Super excited to have you here. Please welcome Malin Arvidsson.
Thank you very much. Just going to wait for the presentation to come up as well. And thank you for the introduction. I actually did do a little introduction here as well, so I'm going to just skip through the slides and so you can just watch the beautiful pictures of my old monitor. This is not an antique monitor. It's actually what they looked like in the old days when I joined. And this was Richard Joseph, where I joined in Pinewood Studios Audio Interactive in 2000 and worked on action game, and a PlayStation game, and Theme Park Inc. Fortunately, Action Man, my first game, was for a 3-year-old, or 4 plus, because it was in those days there wasn't that much technology around. So, in order to see the last scene of the game, I had to play through the whole game, and I had to do that several times in order to be able to design the last scene of the game. So, and I'm not a gamer originally, so. Yeah, it was good that it was 4 plus. Then I decided, me and Richard joined Lexus Studios, and we worked on Evil Genius Republic. I started freelancing after that, did some field recording as well, live recordings, and then worked, as Sarah mentioned before, on a few different games as a freelancer in London. I joined Big Points in Berlin in 2014 and worked on their unreleased title, Game of Thrones. And then I joined PlaySnack, which was an indie company in Berlin. And they focused on VR games. And I worked there for 2 years. We did one game, which was a driving game. So you would just sit on a chair with a headset and no controller, and you would just move around. And then the other game was a first-person shooter game. Again, it was not necessarily both of these games didn't really use the VR capabilities that much. Has anyone played VR games here? Yeah? And did you play Half-Life Alyx? I mean, I think that is one of the best examples of a proper VR game where you can actually move stuff. And these games didn't really use the VR capability. You didn't have free hands. You could just use a gun and shoot. So it wasn't really like being able to pick up anything around you, as you should be able to do in a VR game, I think. Unfortunately, I don't really have any footage from the game, but if you want to see the trailer of Wanted Killer, I can show it to you.
Your need for revenge is reasonable, considering what we did to your parents. But in the end, it's just business. Find and annihilate that little pest.
Yeah, so then when this company unfortunately had to close down, and then I moved to Düsseldorf to join Ubisoft there and worked on one of their major VR titles, which unfortunately I can't talk about because it's not released. And then I decided to join Massive about a year ago in Malmö. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 3D audio and spatial audio. When we combine head tracking with HRTF, reflections and frequency, and volume fall-offs, we can simulate a sound coming from a specific place in the world. I want to touch on 3 different concepts as well: binaural, HRTF, and ambisonics. Binaural is, we all have experience with this, we all have 2 ears, it literally means 2 ears. So we all know what binaural is, but there's obviously a concept. I'm sure you've heard about binaural microphones. I don't know if you've seen the virtual, or listened to the virtual barbershop on YouTube. If you haven't, you can easily find it. Just search for virtual barbershop, where you have binaural mics, or they have binaural mics in the ears, and you can feel that your hair is being cut and people are around you. And actually, binaural microphones was one of my first microphones that I bought in 2001 or 2002. But back then, you didn't really need to use binaural so much. So mainly, we used it to secretly record crowds, and then I used it to record ambience. It's like I would just use it as an A/B setup. But you didn't really use it for games because you can never know if a player is going to play with headphones or on speakers. Well, you can with VR, usually they will play on headphones, but with normal games, you can't really know if they are going to do that. And also because it's headlocked, so you can only really use binaural for anything that is the first-person character. So it's still, even in VR, you wouldn't really use binaural so much, unless you use it for player character sounds like Foley, footsteps, if you are in a first-person VR game. This is Henry. He wanted to join, but I didn't have a ticket for him. But he's my binaural head that I made when I was in Düsseldorf. And he has these silicone ears with microphones inside. So HRTF, or head-related transfer function. Do you know what that is? So when you, so we all have ears, and they're all different shape. And we have a head, we have shoulders, and everyone has different shape of their ears, different shape shoulders, different sizes. And basically, when a sound comes from different direction, they will, or our ears and our head and everything, it will bounce off these places of the body so that we get different frequencies that arrive to our brain. And our brain had learned to understand what these frequencies mean so that we can tell if a sound comes from behind, or from the above, or from the front, or from the sides. And HRTF is basically, well, it's basically a oral fingerprint, so to speak, because everyone has different shaped ears, right? So when you talk about HRTF plugins, for example, if you work on VR audio, there's lots of different HRTF plugins, like Oculus SDK is one of the most common ones. Not every HRTF might work as well for different people. So you have something called personalized HRTF, but if you're going to create an HRTF print for yourself, it's a bit complicated because you have to have microphones in your ears, you have to have speakers all around you and play all these frequencies from all these speakers. So it's not very practical to have your own personalized HRTF. Therefore, mostly that you can get these generalized HRTFs, and some plugins let you choose between a few different ones so that you can find one that suits you better. Saying that, there was someone who experimented with filling some people's pinna. The pinna is, if you don't, I didn't know what the pinna is, the name of the shape of the ear. And filled the pinna of all these people, and they walked around like that for a week. And after about a week, they could again hear directions. So HRTF is also something you can probably learn. So the question is personalized HRTF useful, or will we learn it anyway? I guess if we play the same VR game for a long enough time, we'll learn what the HRTF is. Ambisonics. This is quite a complex topic, and I'm sorry if I get any facts wrong. But it was already developed in the 1970s. But it wasn't really that useful back then because people didn't have, people still don't have surround speakers at home, many people. And in order to listen back to ambisonics, you need to have speakers on all planes. So I guess these days you have Dolby Atmos, which is, so it's becoming more common to be able to listen back to it. But it didn't really become popular until VR became a thing. And nowadays you can find a lot more cheaper microphones that you can buy. Because now you have the HRTF plugins that you can connect with run the ambisonics through, so you can listen back to it on headphones. So there are different orders of ambisonics, and depending on, first order ambisonics only has 4 channels, and I have one of these mics myself, the one you saw on the picture before, actually. This is my mic Fluffy. And first order ambisonics is very generalized, so you can't really hear, you can hear a sense of space, but you can't really pinpoint that bird's coming from there and that bird's coming from there. It's more like spaced out. You can go to third or fifth order. This is where I'm not sure I got it right, because I'm not sure it's second and fourth order exists, but never mind. Third order has 16 channels, for example. And depending on how many channels you want to use for this, of course, it becomes more and more complex. And it's becoming also really expensive to make microphones with 16 capsules, obviously. So that's why it's only really possible to find decent first-order ambisonic microphones. There are some third and fifth order ones, I think, but they're very expensive, and or if they're not that expensive, they're not necessarily good. So yeah, but nowadays you can listen back to it in HRTF, and you can also, instead of having a microphone, you can also create ambisonic ambiances. So you can use, are you game developers? Do you know Wise? Fmod? Wise? Yeah. So in Wise, at least, you can create ambisonic ambiances. So if you create a soundscape, and then you can bounce it out to an ambisonic file. So you don't have to buy lots of expensive microphones, although I do recommend it. I like buying microphones. How do we perceive distance? The sound you hear is direct sound, together with the sound bouncing off all the surfaces and objects in the world, around you. And the further away the sound source is, the less of that direct sound you hear. And there is something called critical distance, where you hear more of the reflections than you hear of the direct sound. And this is, when you get to that point, this is where you can't really tell where a sound is coming from anymore. So if you, in a big cathedral or the mausoleum in Oslo, for example, I guess, I haven't been there, and your friend drops some keys next to you, you will probably hear where they're coming from, but if they're far away, you're not going to hear which direction they are. And motion parallax, how fast is the sound moving? So if it moves fast, it's generally closer to you. If it moves slow, it's probably far away. So like a fly will fly really fast between both your ears, and you can tell. Whereas if you hear an airplane, you can't really hear that it's moving much because it's really far away. Interaural level difference is the difference between your left and your right ear. Yeah, of course, if you have like low frequencies, it will reach both your ears about the same volume, but with high frequency sounds, it will come to one ear before the other. And yeah, and then also movement, turning your head. The ability to move your head helps you also distinguish where a sound is coming from. So obviously with VR games and head tracking, it makes it easier that the player can move their heads as well. Localization on elevation. So it's quite hard to hear if something is coming from, so it's easy to hear if something comes from left or right, but it's a lot harder to hear if something is coming from behind you or from in front of you or on an elevation plane. So first of all, it's important, so what different things can make you help hear where something is coming from? First of all, I think it's important to decide, is it important that the player knows exactly what direction it's coming from? Because if it's just aesthetic spatialization, then maybe you don't have to make sure that they know the direction it's coming from. Because you have all these plugins like the HRTF, for example, I'm going to use the Oculus SDK because I know that's the best. Or I know that better. I don't know it's the best, but I know it's better myself. You can use this to send sounds through it so that you can hear the direction, but it also takes up a lot of CPU. So, and also it filters the sounds really badly, and it might not be what you want it to sound like. So first of all, ask yourself, is it important that the player knows where it's coming from? And if it is important, you have a few examples of sounds that are easy to localize. Like a sine tone is a single frequency. Makes it really hard to localize, because in order for this HRTF to work, or all the different frequencies coming from different directions, you need as broad of a frequency spectrum as possible. So a sine tone is going to be the worst thing. Whereas the waterfall, that has a lot of frequency spectrum, will give you a lot of opportunities to filter that sounds with different frequencies. So, higher frequencies spatialize easier than lower ones. As I mentioned before, low rumbles have longer sound waves, and we usually reach both ears on almost equal level. Sounds that are moving are easier to locate. So if possible, you can add some sort of movement to the sound. Shorter sounds can be very difficult to localize, so repetition is your friend. Give your player an opportunity to hear that sound again if you really need them to know where it's coming from. And also consider what humans have learned already. We know that birds often come in, like sit up in trees, for example. So if you want a player to know that a bird is sitting there, consider the fact that they might not hear that it's coming from there. So you might need to add, I don't know, bird flaps, wing flaps or something, and not just the tweeting. Ambiences. In games we've already used a lot of mono sources for ambiences, where you have maybe just a pad and then you have a lot of mono sources. I think for VR that's even more important because automatically it's head tracked. You turn your head and they're already pinpointed in the right place. Some people, as pads, you can use stereo files. Just remember that stereo file will usually be head locked. So if you turn your head, it will also follow your head. So if you're going to do that, you might want to have a very, very subtle, like room tone or light wind. But this is a place where you can use ambisonics. If it's like a quad file is 4 channels, an ambisonic file is also 4 channels if you have a first order ambisonics. So, but again, I think it's maybe better to have a simple background because otherwise you're going to get a lot of repetition. So just a ambisonic pad that makes it more spatialized and then still have some pinpointed mono sources. But if you have a lot of pinpointed audio sources and you want to save channels, you can also go to like a third order ambisonics and have more detail in the sound, and just have 16 channels. It's not that few, but that is a choice you can make. Yeah, and then headlocks versus non-headlocks. As I've mentioned before, some things are stuck to your head. So if you turn your head, it will follow your head. So should we then never use headlocked audio in VR games? Well, you could, maybe for emotional content, it can be good to have headlocked sounds, like things that happen in the player's mind, like thoughts. But if you want to go for immersion, for the player to feel like they're part of the world, it's probably better to use non-headlocked sounds. And this automatically takes us to music, which is often emotional content. So there are a lot of different approaches, a lot of experimentation that has been happening in VR games since it's fairly new. I know Sony did a lot of examples when they did the VR worlds, if anyone has played that. One where they had, because the question is, do you do like just 2D headlocked music, or do you do variation when the player is moving their head? And they did some nice things with, like, if you look up, you would bring in some higher frequency layers of the music, and if you look down, they bring in some lower frequency, like lower layers. And they did things like adding, I think there was, the Ocean Descent, where they added maybe parts of, like, the jellyfish was making these extra noises as well that fit with the music. And they did also a game on a giant skateboard where when you have music playing in your headphones, and then you drive past a car that has this percussion tracks, and then they would add that to the same track of music. So they would add elements. And there's examples as well where you have a 2D music, and then you enter a room, and that becomes diegetic music. Maybe a band is playing or so. So you can experiment between, immersion or emotion, I guess. Between 2D and 3D music. character sounds. So normally in a game, you might add all the sounds to the root of the character, or there's like one skeleton. In VR games, you might be able to get closer to that character, or if you are the player character, you might want to add it to the actual, like to the feet, so you have the footsteps on the feet. Dialogue comes from your mouth. Anything from the hands comes straight from the hands. Otherwise, yeah, it would be more obvious if it comes from just the skeleton. Physics is a big topic in games, in VR games. If you can pick up anything, you can slam anything. You can do any velocity you want. So I still haven't heard a VR game that has really good physics sounds or really satisfying physics sounds. I think Half-Life Alyx kind of did a little bit of it, but it didn't feel satisfying to me. And I think, you know, I've tried this myself as well. And if you want to have, if you have a lot of objects you can pick up and you have a lot of different materials, it can easily kind of go out of hand with, you can hit things, you can scrape things, you can roll things, and you might do it on wood, on metal, on glass, on your arm. What do you do then, you know, or your head, you know, there's so many different materials. So it can easily go out of hand. And I think one problem is that I always feel like there's a slight delay when you hit. I think maybe the technology is just not up to date yet. So if you hit it, it always feels a little bit like it comes a few milliseconds too late. So it doesn't get that satisfaction of the way you do it in real life. So I hope that there will be a game soon that has this, because I think that's one of the most fun things in VR games is when you can pick up things and throw them around. So I hope that there will be a game soon that is satisfying enough. Mixing. So back in the days, you couldn't connect to a project live while you were mixing. So you had to make your changes, save, restart the game, listen back again, and then over and over. And with VR, I think it's almost back to that as well, because you have to wear your headset when you mix. So you can split it up into, you can be two people maybe. It's a solution that one person plays the game and tells the other person what to take notes or what to do. Or maybe you can have a headphone splitter. But it's pretty hard to mix at the same time as you have the headset on. There are software these days, but for linear media, where you can mix in VR. But I think if you also play a game in VR and you work on a game in VR, you have your headset on so much that you might not want to have it on all the time for mixing as well, because it can get quite tiring for your eyes, especially if it's a hot summer day. In Berlin, when I was there, it could get to 40 degrees, and we didn't have an aircon, and then you had to have your headset on. It was quite hot. Yeah, another thing, since the one tip that I found, since the player can look anywhere, in Wanted Killer, for example, we had level designers decided to put this helicopter in a level. And of course, if you look at it, you want it to make sound, right? But if you look away, you don't want to have this helicopter all the time. So what I decided to do was just to filter it out when you don't look at it, and to filter it in when you do look at it. And this is something you can do for other games as well, of course. But since this is the only in-game example I have of the game, I thought I could play it to you. So as I mentioned before, HRTF plugins can really color the sound in a bad way. So you design a sound, and then you put it in the game, you put HRTF on it, and it sounds crap. So one thing that you could do if you really need that localization, and as I mentioned, we talked about before as well, the low frequencies don't really localize that well anyway, is, for example, if you have a gunshot, to have, you can split it up into 3 layers. You can put maybe the Foley or the click through HRTF so you can hear that high frequency content coming from the gun. And then maybe you want to send the actual shot through the normal spatializer, Fmod or Y spatializer, and then maybe you want to add a 3rd layer of like the tail or something through just in 2D to get that more Hollywood feel, so that you don't just have this terrible HRTF sound. Sorry. Yeah, and also one good thing, I guess, with VR is that you can almost be certain that the player is going to play on headphones, which is a luxury that you don't get for other games. You don't know which headphones, and also for some, like PSVR always have a social screen as well, so the other players can watch. And of course, then you need to provide a different mix for that is not head-tracked. But yeah, that's one benefit of VR at least. But I think it's quite hard to participate what the sound is going to sound like in VR, more so than a normal game. But another benefit, I guess, is also that people often turn the sound off in games, as you probably know. VR, I think, sound becomes even more important than other games. So I did find that more of my colleagues listened to the game, not all of them, but more of them listened to the game than in other game companies I worked for. And I mean, one thing is you can't see in 360, so you have to, in order to see what's happening behind you, you have to turn your head. But you can hear in 360, so you can always hear everything around you. So that's something that might be good to also mention to your game designers, that you can use audio to help the player focus in ways that you can't do with other media, like visuals. Tools, there are a lot of different plugins on the market. I mentioned Oculus SDK. When I was working in VR, they had Oculus SDK and the Google Resonance were the main ones. I think it keeps changing. I did a lot of research back then, but I think now they're all different. So I haven't really done research again. So, and you also have a lot of ambisonic plugins to listen back to ambisonics. Back when I bought my mic, you could only get there was something called Ambisonic Toolkit, which was really complicated, and that was a free plugin. I used something called Harpex, which I still use, which is a lot easier, but costs money. But these days you have something called Rode Soundfield. If you know microphones, you will know what Rode is, the brand. And they bought Soundfield, which was one of the most common ambisonic microphones. And they got a plugin as well. And I think that ends my talk. If you have questions. Henry wished he could be here, but. Okay.
Regarding the orders of the ambisonics, the second order was 9. I've usually only seen ambisonic arrays in pairs. Is the 9th like above the array in that case?
So I'm not allowing ambisonic questions because I'm not.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding. I'm not actually entirely sure how the different orders work.
All right.
I know the first order because I have a first order mic, but I haven't really done that much research into the other ambisonic.
Fair enough.
Sorry.
No
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hey. Oh, wow. Sorry. Coming from indie games, we usually try to go away from realism because we don't have a team of 500 sound designers on our team. So we're trying to find more artistic and weird, basically, solutions to things. Do you have any cool tips on how to use AHF binaural recordings or anything like that for creatively interesting, weird soundscapes or something like that?
So, do I have any tips on using
tips
HRTF?
using this kind of recording techniques, like for something creatively like trippy or weird, or have you learned anything cool with these kind of recording techniques? That
You mean recording with ambisonics, or? No, I was. Yeah, no, I mean, it would be quite interesting to put it into a washing machine or something, but I haven't done that. I'm not going to do it when the washing machine is running anyway. No, I've only really recorded ambiences with my ambisonic mic. Ambiences, yeah. Room tones, ambiences.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Any more questions? No? Thanks so much for sharing. It's super, super fascinating. We are expanding through and growing through everything. So, yeah, thanks so much. Now we do have a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back for the panel. it's time for our last, the panel. Have you ever tried to talk about what you're doing to your colleagues and they don't get what you're talking about at all? Maybe you don't even get what they're talking about either. So to me, it's like a mystery how you're able to create stunning games without understanding each other. But you do. The question is, could a communication have been done easier? Today's panel is called Working with Non-Audio Teammates, Simplifying the Audio Lingo. In our panel are Sophia, Malin, and Game Chair Theo, who will be panelist and moderator. So, run discussion.
Sit here.
Do I have sound? Yeah. Yeah. So, thank you, Sarah. This is an interesting topic that have always come to us, and we have at GAIN have discussed it a few times. How sometimes we are talking among ourselves, and it's easy. Let's bring the idea. Are we talking about ambisonics? Are we talking about HRTF? What are we talking about? And then you bring this to someone who doesn't understand audio at all, and suddenly they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So it really is about communication, and that doesn't happen just in our industry. It happens everywhere when you work with people that everyone does a different job in a company or in a studio, either if you are a freelancer or not, because if you get a director that comes to you and asks you for something that maybe it's not just they not understanding us, but we understanding what they mean when they want something, right? Sophia, can you share the strangest, or at least one of the strangest miscommunication issues you had?
I don't think my miscommunications have been like really untypical or super strange, but what I can think of is someone referring to a particular moment in a track, referring, for example, to a particular instrument, but it's actually a different instrument, or they're describing the sound in a way that I think of removing actually another part. So sometimes I have to go, it's like, okay, particular in like I don't know, 25th second, is it like this noise sound or like this thing that sounds like, I don't know, a bird or something? So I think these are kinds of things that are sometimes challenging. And another thing is sometimes it would happen to me that I would get music references, and then I would also get some guidelines regarding like what sound or what vibe or what emotions we want to convey. But they don't really match. So sometimes I think like, oh, okay, we want this vibe, but connect it with what I was, sent like as a reference. But then it turns out that actually the client doesn't want to go to that direction, but for some reason they found these references. And I think maybe it might be important to figure out what was this particular thing that they liked in the music, or maybe they changed the idea in the meantime. So these are the kind of miscommunications that I think happen most to me. Yeah.
What about you?
I can't think of any right now. Yeah, I do. Should I use this microphone or this microphone?
Doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter. You can just use the one that you have on you now, I think.
Okay. Does this work? Okay. I can't really think about any miscommunication issues right now.
Maybe a sound that they asked for you, like, hey, can you make it sound like this? And then suddenly you make it, and then it's not that they meant.
I think, as I mentioned earlier as well, I think when I started, no one really listened to the game anyway. And maybe that was a good thing, because that meant that they just let me get on with things and they didn't know what was happening. I have had times where they have asked for things that I didn't agree with, and then usually I just hold it off until they forget about it. I shouldn't admit to these things, should I? I hope no one is listening. So I've done that too. Yeah.
I was about to ask, does it come back to bite you later? But I guess that's.
Well, usually you always run out of time at the end of the project, so.
You say it's there, but just, you know, deep in the mix. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually remember there was a situation that I had with a film where a director asked me to make something spiritual. This track should be spiritual, a music track. And it was funny because he gave me a folder with over 100 references, and every single reference was completely different from each other. Completely different genres of music, and they were all different lengths. And then I was like, wait, which of these do you want me to reference? And all of them. Just find the middle ground. And it's like, I made 7 versions and still didn't get there. But yeah, but like I said before, it's a two-way street as well. So that's exactly what I meant. Is many times you're going to get these questions and they come to you and they can't really explain in a sound manner of what they're looking for, right? So. Yeah, in these cases, do you have any tips in general of like how do you approach like getting a direction and then suddenly you start making something and then it's like, wait, is that what they really mean? Like, what do you think?
I mean, I think the examples itself speaks more than words, I guess. I think I would just do what I think they mean, and then, of course, that takes longer, but then just do feedback back and forth until you get there, right? I think just talking is never going to get you there.
For me, I think if I get set of references, I mean, it can be different depending on the people you work with and the project, but in my experience, it was rather like, it was never like we want to exactly this kind of music, but I always treated these references rather like we want these emotions or this kind of vibe, and I would propose something that was mine and like different from this music, but would follow the vibe of this music. And if I collaborate with someone on like more long-term basis, then sometimes I just create this like reference sheet myself, and I would write, okay, in this particular piece, I like the, I don't know, the tempo and like these instruments, maybe we could use this or that, and so that they can listen to it and say, yeah, that we like it, that could work, or not. Yeah, sometimes it happens that we don't stick to it because, of course, the idea changes and the game changes. But it's sometimes, I think, useful to have like some keywords in your head. For example, sometimes I find myself, I make music and I like really get into it and I really like this cue, and then I'm like, okay, is it really, I don't know, does it cause like some anxiety or is it chill out? And I was like, okay, I got into it because I really like the vibe, but it's not really what we should be doing. And sometimes even before giving it to the client or like presenting it to the team, I'm like, okay, I like it, but I'm sorry, Zofia, you have to just get rid of it. It's not.
Oh, you should always keep those for later for something else, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And when it comes to references, I think as well, like I mentioned, the 100 tracks reference I got, that can play out really badly in the end, because then many times they also get married to that temp track, and you are like, okay, I can't copy it, but at the same time, how close can I get without getting sued? But at the same time, I still want to make it mine, right? Have you had this situation where you had to almost make a copy and then suddenly it's like you are scared for it in a way?
I was lucky enough to never got a request to replicate something, but rather like these were just like loose references. So I always got away with doing my own thing. But I know that it might happen differently somewhere in the future. I hope not.
What do you think?
Well, so just to clarify, I'm not a composer. I only do sound design, and that is probably also the communication issues, because I think game directors or game designers are always more interested in the music part, and many people assume that you're a composer when you say you're a sound designer. So I think that is also like they don't always care what the sound designer does, but they will care a lot about what music you put on the game. So yeah.
But I feel like, and then that getting into sound systems, for example, this is something that I feel that also that there's a lot of like, oh, I really want that system in my game. And one example that I brought up here is that with Senua's Sacrifice, the voiceover system. Have either of you played that before? Really recommend for anybody that hasn't played it. It's in the game, the character is supposed to be schizophrenic in a way, and then you have the voiceovers popping all over. And as you progress in the
Hellblade,
game,
yeah?
Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice.
Okay. Then
yeah.
I've played that. Yeah.
It is a great game, and as you progress, you get more voices and more voices, and you start feeling like anxious. And I've got a friend that told me that they had an issue with that because their director came to them and was like, hey, I want that system in our game. And it's like this children's game that doesn't fit at all. It's like, why do you need that? And they really get married to this idea. So how would you handle something like that?
Tricky.
Maybe ask like, why do you want this? You know,
Yeah.
because in Hellblade it's also UX. So you're fighting and it says behind you. And it's like her voice, but it's also like informing you. So I think I would ask like, what's the why do you want it in the game? Just because it's cool, or does it serve any purpose? Does it serve gameplay?
Yeah, come up with examples, or maybe make a 2D or what's it called, a linear example of what that's going to sound like to make sure that's really, really what they want. I usually try to argue against if I don't agree with it until the bitter end, until they if they really, really want it, then of course in the end, the director decides, right? But then at least you tried your best to change their mind. I had actually one of my producers, I hope he's not listening, he really wanted Spotify in the game, and I had to explain to him that Spotify is not free, and that was a very long discussion trying to explain why it's not free, why you can't get free music into a game with Spotify.
Yeah, that's a whole discussion. There's a whole discussion of music rights. We're actually on Gain, we're trying to work on that as well. Try to help things for the game industry in terms of copyrights. It's a very tricky subject.
Yeah.
And Spotify makes it even worse because it's a whole business. And then how do you bring that on top of dealing with the music rights? Yeah, but that's right. So you would say that you work on it, even though it's a system you don't agree on it, to show them as an example? And
not necessarily work on the system, just do maybe a linear example of it to...
Like a mock-up.
Yeah, if you can't explain to them that it doesn't work, maybe you can do a linear mock-up of what they would sound like.
Yeah.
To see if that
really sounds like a good tip, actually. Yeah, I should bring that up to my friend. Yeah. Definitely. So yeah, really, I think that's really. I just have one last question, but of course we want to open up to all of you as well. If there's anything that you were wondering in this subject or anything that you want to ask them, this is a good chance. But the last one, do you have any thoughts specifically on other ways that you can improve communication with other teammates that really understand nothing of music, understand nothing of sound design, and how you build something from the ground up, or how do you record it, how you edit and change it? They understand nothing of it. So, but they completely understand the other side of the visuals, for example. So how do you really bring, or maybe even use their own language as a way to explain what you mean? You have any secrets or anything that you can think of in that side of things?
I would say maybe like in business, like you sometimes ask your client not what exactly they want, but what's the goal. So I think it would be best to ask like not exactly what music or sound you want, but what do you want to achieve. Like maybe you want something from the UX point of view. We want the player to know that this is happening, and then you're the expert in sound design and you know what sound you can make so that the player knows something's happening. Or, I don't know, we want this emotion, and then you as a composer can think of ideas how to achieve that, I think. So, but it depends on a team. Sometimes people want you to do exactly something they have in their mind, and sometimes they have also nice ideas, and you have to adjust.
Also, I think examples from films and stuff, like putting together a visual, like a video from that you download different YouTube clips and put together to show what you mean. I think it's also that kind of speaks more than words as well.
One reference, right? You don't want 100.
Yeah. However many, you know, if you have a specific example from that you know this is happening in this film, then find that particular example, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, any questions that you might have for them specifically?
What are the most frequent problems you run into, and how would you solve them? Both of you, actually.
I think, I mean, before it used to be time, I guess, lack of time. I used to have a lot of problems with people not telling me if they changed things, like last-minute changes that you then found out too late. And also, I mean, I've been in the industry for a long time, so in the very past, you shipped on a disk, and that was it. Yeah, you couldn't update it. And nowadays we have, a game is not finished when it's shipped anymore. So you just, add patches and fix all the problems later. But back then you couldn't do that. So if the game was done, you would ship with some places where there were no sound because they hadn't told you on time. I remember actually something, if you know Adele Cutting, I remember her telling a really great story about how they did this experiment, or they did like workshops at work where everyone moved around. So she would have an audio workshop for some other people in the company, and where they would put sound on a video, and like I think 5 minutes before the end of the workshop, she changed the video. And they were like, well, you changed the video. And she was like, see, that's what happens. So that was a good way to teach them.
I heard similar example from a film world where someone would just like, a sound person would just like go in front of camera during shooting and saying, you'll cut out in post-production. But yeah, I think, people changing things in the game, not thinking that it might affect audio is a common problem. I see also a lot of memes on Twitter. It's like, surely this will not affect audio, and all that kind of stuff. And I think time, like you said as well, that it's an iterative process, and you need constant feedback, and that also works differently. Like, you really want your team to play with sound. They don't always do. Well, that's also understandable because you get tired if you play the game a lot. But I think this is also important to encourage your team to participate in also playing the game with sound and music, and like give you feedback.
Sure. Yeah, and they like programmers who would, I mean, now where I work at Massive, we have audio programmers, but like many places where we had programmers who would say they put something in, and then you played it and it was clearly not working. And that was like a very, very common problem that I've had, where you have to keep going back, and it's like, it's not working. And then they're like, I'll do it again. And then, oh, now it should be working. But they never test it. So then it comes back to you and it's still not working. So, back and forth a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes even if sometimes happens the person wants to check, but they don't know what they should be hearing.
Yeah.
So they say, hey, I mean, I'm like changing this parameter, but what should I hear? I don't really hear anything. And so sometimes maybe I would need to put like a very annoying sound for debugging that, okay, now you're gonna fall off your chair if that works. And
Yeah.
then,
I once had one guy, one of the programmers, he told me that, oh, there's a lot of reverb on everything. And I'm like, I don't think it's that much. And then I listened to his game, and it turned out that you know, when you send it to the outputs, I'd forgotten to send the rest of this, like to not send the, I'd forgotten to send the reverb to the final faders. And he had turned the sound off, but he only had reverb. And he was like, it's a lot of reverb. And I listened to it. I was like, it's only reverb? And he didn't even notice that. I was like, oh my God, this is really bad. But I mean, at least he discovered that I'd forgotten to send the reverb to the faders. So that was good.
you discovered he didn't listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an issue that I have a lot too. Many times the worst, I think it comes with mixing, where suddenly someone decides, oh, this is not loud enough, and they just go and change the faders in there. And then because mostly now I'm mostly working in Unreal directly without even middleware, so that way everybody has access to the same project. So if they decide to change a volume, they change a volume. So not complaining, it's working fine. That the only issue is that sometimes you're gonna hear something super loud, and it's like, wait, I didn't do this. Who changed it? And it's like, okay, that's why that sound is playing so loud. And of course, you're the one that they were gonna ask, why is this so loud?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's something that also comes back to us a lot.
And also game designers putting placeholder sounds in without telling you.
That as well.
And then you're like, what is the sound? And then you can't find it because they put it somewhere where you don't know where it is.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, we've had to tell the team many times, don't put placeholder. Tell us if you need a placeholder sound. Don't put your own stuff in.
Any other questions? Okay, do you want to bring it here? He has a microphone there.
Okay, so music question. Is there any interactive music specifics you need to think about when recording live musicians?
So the project I recorded was linear, so it wasn't live, so it wasn't interactive. But I think it would be more complicated since you would need to record in chunks. So you would need to divide it into separate blocks that you would later like turn on and off, or like draw from the playlist. So also the session would be divided more into parts. So I think it's also composing is different. So maybe it would be also harder to get into the flow. Yeah.
Any other?
How do you solve issues with the vocabulary between the game designers, sound designers, and composers? Because in my experience, people have quite different vocabulary. So how do you do you put out some ground rules for what kind of, how do you want things to be described, or how do you solve it?
I haven't had a huge issue with it myself, so I'm not sure if I'm the right person to.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's maybe something that I said at the beginning, that we would describe exactly what kind. For example, someone tells me this sound is annoying, or I don't like that sound in the music. We would have to like say specifically in what second, and like try to describe it in a way that I know what the person is talking about, because sometimes saying, oh, it's this violin line, or it's like this synthesizer pad, it doesn't work, because it's not always clear what instrument it is, and it might really get confusing. So we really need to, is it like the one that does shh and it's like the noise or something like this?
Yeah, in my experience, it's been more about trying not to use too much of an audio lingo specifically, unless I'm talking to people that are audio savvy specifically. If I am talking to someone who is not, then I will try to explain. Yeah, well, I'm not going to explain that it's spatial audio. I'm going to explain that this audio is going to be playing like you are in the real world. It's placed on a specific location. So it's more about trying to use words that can be understood by people that are not audio people. And usually they don't want to change their vocabulary, so we kind of have to adapt ourselves. But I have worked with people that have had no problems in also changing theirs, because if I'm working with an animator, for example, and they're using their own vocabulary, and they need to explain how they want a sound to play on their specific animation, then you also have an issue. Because then they also need to switch to a more understandable language, so we can both do it and then suddenly come to an agreement.
I guess also not be scared to ask what they mean if they do use language that we don't understand, and then you will understand it next time.
Yeah. Any other question?
Could I comment on that?
Of course. Microphone. There.
Thank you. I think maybe usually composers are integrated into a production very late. So if a composer is integrated earlier, they would get to know each other, and you could test and try these lingos and experiment with that, because that's the norm.
Yeah, I agree. Also, hiring composers early is good for the game. In-house composer.
I mean, it takes several years often to make a game, so why wait? I mean, make it part of the team.
Exactly.
Maybe you can answer on that side. I mean, more because a sound designer usually is part of the team.
Yeah,
but a
exactly.
composer is usually not.
I was just thinking that actually maybe one of the reasons why I haven't had that problem is because even though I was freelancing for 9 years, I was like contracting in-house mainly. I haven't really worked. I can't work from home. This is really not my thing. So I've mostly been with the team, which means I see them on a daily basis. So I think that probably makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I would also add that being part of the team is like just completely different work, because people that give you comments are your colleagues, and like if you like each other, you know each other, you just like, it's normal. They give you feedback, you don't understand, you just talk, it's fine. And if it's you work remotely with a client just for like a particular thing and just exchange emails, you're not like on a colleague basis, maybe it's like both parties don't feel super comfortable in like giving feedback, and you don't understand each other as well as if they're like people maybe you see every day in the office and drink beer with and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like it is the difference between working with a client or working with a colleague. Really, they are more than right in there. For me, that changed this like a year ago, because I have been working as a freelancer pretty much this whole time, and then suddenly I landed to work with Snowcastle as in-house, and I'm both sound designer and composer, so I'm doing both sides of things. And but I guess it's more like if I wasn't doing the sound design, they probably wouldn't get me as an in-house composer, just composer. But because I'm doing both things, then it becomes a little easier to handle the work that way. So I think that would probably mean that, because in most cases you see that there's very few in-house composers in studios around the world. And I think when you're not in-house, they want to leave that expense to the last minute and to keep it to a minimum. Or many times they just forget and they leave it to the last minute to take it then, because like, hey, we have 2 weeks to release the game. We just need something there. Let's just pay them as much as we need just to get the music in, and that's it. And I experienced that on a freelance side as well. So, any other questions?
I have a question. On the topic of reference tracks and composition, I'm wondering, do you ever have to deal with reference tracks with quality that is kind of unreachable So imagine if you got a reference track that was like John Williams' super complex orchestration, something like that. How would you approach something like that if the developer wants you to get really close to that, but obviously it's very difficult to get there to that kind of level?
Yeah, it hasn't happened to me to get John Williams reference yet. Yeah, I'm thinking. No, I would definitely say we need more budget. No, of course, like certain kind of music would be, for example, hard to make with a mocap. And I think, I don't know, just it hasn't happened to me, like to have this like unreasonable request. And I think people that hired me so far, like they hear my demos and they know like what kind of music I make. And also usually before you take on a job, you know more or less what kind of music they will be requesting. So I think if someone requested from me something that's like something that I know I can do or I cannot do within that budget, I would just say it and figure it out from there, or maybe just suggest something else that could work.
Maybe just give them a comparison budget. This is what it's going to cost if you want this.
This horse, like this airplane.
Just one lettuce note on that, and I think it's mostly because if you have a bigger budget, you can also hire orchestrators to help you achieve that goal. So if they want that goal, they need to pay for that goal. So yes. Oh, Oliver.
Yeah. Hey. So since you have like two very different backgrounds, like on the topic of communication, you probably like report to very different people, right? Like Malin, you probably talk more to like an audio director or something.
Yeah, actually, well, I have worked for smaller companies as well, like the VR company I worked for in Berlin. I was the only audio person there. And we do, actually, Marie Haverman, who's speaking tomorrow, she did music for one of our games. But otherwise, they didn't want to pay for composers, so we
Right. So how do you feel does your communication style change like based on who on the team you're talking to? And have you ever like gone the extra mile to learn their lingo in order to like, for instance, when you're talking to animators or you're talking to a programmer or whatever, have you ever had to like make the step to like at least get the general knowledge of like what they're talking about so you can meet them halfway and don't expect them to like learn all of your lingo?
I mean, I think, again, like I said before, if you work with them on a day-to-day basis, I guess it's also you have different lingos as a people, right? It's not just as a work job. You also speak in different ways, so if you actually get to know each other, I think it is easier to understand each other anyway. I did work a lot with animators in my first game. I worked more with, we had an audio director, me, and a programmer, but the audio director didn't really care what I did, so I just worked with everyone in the team to kind of get what I needed, including vomiting sounds. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's just about learning, getting to know people, I think, in my experience. If you understand people, you can communicate. You say if you don't understand, they say if you don't understand, and it's easier if you can communicate face to face, right? I think if you're not on site and you have to do it all in writing, it's so much easier to misunderstand each other.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so you'd say you probably then work, since you work with like bigger companies and stuff, you probably had like longer pipelines then. And like someone who's working like on an indie game who's like it's over in like 2 months and then.
Yeah, I think for the VR game company we did do shorter ones as well. Yeah, for sure. And I did do smaller games when I was freelance as well, but they were mobile games that I didn't really care about.
Yeah. Do you think that impacted like? Do you feel like the communication was very different like when you worked with people like in short term versus long term?
It was more pressure to get things in, I guess, but
Not really?
I don't remember.
Fair enough.
Oh, I had a question, but it was answered very well. Any questions?
Back. All the way up the back. Sorry. Going up to the back.
Thank you. I'm going to try my very best to formulate this question. I think it might be a bit broad, but oh well. So, I myself am a game designer. I've been doing this for 1.5 years now, so I'm kind of fresh. But I'm working on making my first big game. And I just wondered if you have some general pointers as to how game developers or game designers can make the process in such a way, or work in such a way to make it as comfortable or as efficient for the sound designers and composers as possible. I currently find that my biggest problem, or my biggest concern, is that I'm not able to keep up with you guys because you're so competent and so efficient in your work. But yeah, do you have some general pointers on that?
I think information is definitely key because, as we mentioned before as well, you don't necessarily get. I think sometimes game designers forget that you need audio for certain things, and they will change things and forget to tell the sound designers about it. So I think information is definitely important early enough. So there is time. Also, I mean, to build systems, if you do need audio systems, that take a lot of time. And you need programming help, and you need all sorts of different help. So yeah, as early as possible, as much information as possible, and listen to the game. Don't turn it off, the sound.
I agree, and also wanted to say I'm really happy to see a game designer on audio conference. Because I think it's important that game designers are interested in sound and music because it's part of the storytelling and the narrative. And so I agree, if you walk through audio people, composers through the game, and make sure they know what the game is about, what you want to convey, and they know the game almost as well as you do, then if you trust them, you can leave the rest to them and just be sure you listen to their work and be sure you keep them updated if things change or the game develops, and that you have this constant feedback loop. But I think having this frame from the creative direction or game design point of view, what do you want to achieve, and then letting the composer or the audio person to figure out the aesthetics, I think it's a nice way of working. Just probably different in different sizes of the studios, because there's probably more hierarchy in bigger studios. But if you can work that way, I think audio people would be happy, right?
And you can also use a lot of audio for game design as well. So I think if you have sound designers involved early enough, you can play with ideas as well, how you can use sounds in a different way and not just slamming on top of the game.
Yeah, and treating also music and audio as just another part of the game that you can also iterate on, and change it as game evolves. I think it's a good approach as well.
Sound is cheap, by the way, as well. Sound is a lot cheaper than animation, so using sound can often be cheaper way to get to a goal than using other means.
Can I just yes? Oh, thank you. So I understand it correctly that getting sound people involved as early as possible is also good for that reason, that you can actually let them experiment and them show you what's maybe possible to make.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, with music it can be complicated in terms of okay, you start with an idea of a game, but then it sometimes happens, it completely changes. The aesthetics changes. I don't know, you change the publisher and they want something else. So maybe it's harder to plan like, okay, we're gonna do this music and then record it or whatever. But yeah, it's also something you can iterate on and like keep having any ideas, and also music I think can inspire game design as well, maybe. So.
Thank you both very much. And it's
Thank you.
been great. I feel like we could sit and keep talking about this forever. But yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a pretty good day.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so happy to be here and looking forward to tomorrow.
And thank you for everyone who came.
Thanks for a great panel discussion and for the questions from you guys. I'll try to sum it up because our first conference day has come to its end, almost. We've been through live recordings, Foley, VR audio, and everything in between. We've been talking about and discussing audio lingo and communication. And I've learned a lot today and have a lot of new inspiration. I hope it's the same with you guys. Thanks again to our excellent speakers. Sofia Domarecka, Malin Arvidsson, Almut Schwacke, and Theo Nogueira. Please give them another round of applause. So my inner audio nerd is super happy and satisfied after today, but also hungry for more, so fortunately there's another day tomorrow. And then we'll learn about everything from how to find your own voice as a sound designer and composer in games to AI. And we also have another interesting panel. So, okay. Thanks so much for coming today. Let's move upstairs and have some beer. Thanks.